States is well represented within the various task forces, but also within the advisory council. And that is intentional because we know that in 2026, the baton will be passed over to the United States. Some of the task forces, essentially there are 5 task forces. Those include trade and investment, digital transformation, financing for sustainable development, solidarity for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and lastly, accelerating climate change and the just energy transition. Where we are, colleagues, as we host the Inception Conference, is that some of you have already submitted abstracts. Those abstracts for the policy briefs are already at advanced levels in terms of evaluation. However, what is also important to note is that it will not only be about the policy briefs, but many of you will also be invited to produce policy notes and blogs for the website that continue to inform the discussion. And it's definitely the intention of the T20 to work proactively with the various engagement groups, the working groups, the Sherpa, and the finance track. The last point, colleagues, is that South Africa hosts the presidency in a changing geopolitical landscape, which faces a number of challenges. And I think that only enhances the importance of evidence-based empirical work and policy recommendations in the face of various disinformation and misinformation that we have been seeing around. We would definitely like to achieve a high impact in terms of the outcomes for this T20, and we welcome your inputs to this particular conference. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mthembu, for those remarks. Maybe before I jump to Elizabeth, I'd just like to clarify that the timer on the top left of your screen is the time allocated to each speaker. So as soon as that rings, it means that your time to speak is up, colleagues. So maybe please also again tailor the remarks accordingly. Without any further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Elizabeth Sidropoulos, who is the Chief Executive at the South African Institute of International Affairs. Over to you, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Hi, thanks Duma. Thank you very much to everybody. I did think that sounded a bit like an Oscar moment there, Duma, with the music. Just to say welcome to everybody, to reiterate what Pelani has said in terms of the support that we have received and certainly the participation in the Inception Conference, as well as in the submission of the policy briefs. Just to say the various task forces are in the process of going through those, and I know some of you may have already heard, others you will hear soonest. I've been asked to make some reflections, which Pelani sort of alluded to in his final remarks around the G20 and multilateralism. And I think the first point to really make is that you know, if we think back to what the G20 was created for, both when it was a finance ministers meeting in 1999 and then when it was elevated to a leaders in 2008, it was about recognizing the importance of cooperating and coordinating among a group of countries that were systemically important and who could then make an important contribution to ensuring, first and foremost, global economic stability, dealing with the financial crisis, and so on and so forth. In the ensuing period, of course, the importance of cooperation within a system of multilateralism, I think, has become even more important. It's not just about how you deal with crises, but how you deal with a very real and present crisis, for example, the consequences of which we're already feeling, but which will become increasingly more acute if we don't address it. And that, for example, might be the case of when we speak about climate or when we talk about pandemics. And so the G20 was really about augmenting the multilateral system and trying to build consensus to drive forward some critical decisions, policy frameworks, regulations to help us actually deal with the crises that are facing us. And I think over the last 15 or 16 years, since it has been elevated to, it's a little bit more than that, since it's been elevated to a head of state level, I think there have been some significant movement in that regard. Of course, in the first instance around the financial crisis of 2008, but even more recently, particularly in some of the financial areas, if we think of the progress made around multilateral development bank reform. Some small efforts, and we'll hear a little bit more about it later on, around debt, although very, very imperfect, but certainly something that for certain countries, particularly in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, provided some relief. And also in the last 3 years, with South Africa taking the presidency as the 4th developing country, I think really putting development front and center, highlighting the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals and the need to accelerate it. I think we all know that a multilateral cooperation and a rules-based order are important for us to deal with these many challenges that are cross-cutting. We also know that the global governance system as it is now has many weaknesses and it is in dire need of reform. But we also know that upending the system or subverting the existing system without actually a plan to really reform it and to deal with some of the significant structural challenges doesn't necessarily help to address many of these challenges that I've alluded to in a few seconds ago. And I'm probably maybe not being as diplomatic, but probably more diplomatic than I might have been. I think most of us recognize the importance of the need to work together to deal with polycrises, and I think we are currently truly at a crossroads in terms of the way in which we want to see the international system move forward. And I think there is a very real responsibility, both within the formal G20, and we'll hear a little more about it from the Sherpa just now, but also for us as a Think 20, as a community of ideas that can help to chart ways forward in difficult context for some of the most pressing issues and help identify some of the issues that may be easier to drive forward in this context, while always aiming to support multilateralism and cooperation in that regard. So that's, I suppose, the challenge to us as a T20, and I think the challenge to the broader G20 community, particularly in this year where we have so many uncertainties and so much volatility. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for those remarks. Maybe now against that backdrop, I would like to invite Professor Siphamandla Zondi, who is the director at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation, to then now give us the South Africa's approach to the T20 under the South African T20 president. Over to you, Prof.
Good afternoon, good morning, good day to all of you, depending on the time in which you are in. To the officials of the South African government and the presidency of the G20, especially from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Director General is here, and the Department of Communications and Digital Technology, senior official is here, the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, they are also here, and a few others that are here. We want to recognize your presence. The chairs, the co-chairs, and the co-leads of the 5 task forces that we have this year, members of the Advisory Council, and fellow conveners of the T20 South Africa. We want to greet all of you. Now, South Africa, the T20 South Africa, of course, is operating under that broader G20 presidency theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, and it hopes to achieve that approach to the big and very difficult questions facing the G20 this year. Secondly, the T20 South Africa is very aware of the fact that there has been a lot of continuity in the agenda of the T20, especially over the last 5 or so presidency, and therefore the decision is to do more consolidation and continuity and sustaining the momentum rather than disrupting due to too many new initiatives, but cannot do what we've been doing and try to do them better. With that in mind, then thirdly, we also aim to be inclusive, but not unwieldy. Make sure that everybody is able to get a view, get a moment in a space to contribute to this agenda, but we don't want to make this an unwieldy and difficult to manage process. And partly for that reason, we have an advisory council that we want to be a sounding board, but get engaged in real debates, both about the substance of things and strategies, and also about processes and procedural things. Fifth, we have a Troika leadership and a Troika arrangement in there. So we have the Brazilians working with us, and also the US friends working with us as the next presidency. And that is what we hope to sustain as much as it's possible and make it work even stronger. We have 5 task forces instead of 6, consolidated a little bit of agenda again, because we, as we indicated, we didn't want to open up the agenda. We wanted to consolidate and complete work that has been done and ensure that we derive greater impact rather than introducing new issues all the time. We have also fewer policy briefs that we're expecting, as you know, about 20 from each task force, so that we can also make room for the 6th or 7th point, which is more engagement within task forces and between task forces and all of that. So we are not spending all the time trying to manage a huge number of policy briefs. We're hoping for in-depth discussions relating to Africa's interest here, as African Union is the latest member of the G20, through the Africa High-Level Dialogue. That's what is different from before, which is taking place on the 29th and 30th of April. We hope out of it, working very closely with the officials of the African Union and African Union agencies, will be able to distill what will be of critical importance for Africa. Of course, there are side events that we hope will help us dive a little deeper into issues and provide space for us to engage. Lastly, we are also interfacing with the Sherpa and the Sous Sherpa, so that we make sure we align very closely with the processes in the G20 mainstream. And of course, a dynamic interface with fellow engagement group is absolutely critical for us, so that there's cross-pollination of ideas and all of that. I recently engaged with the W20, for example, with U20. We're hoping to soon talk to Y20 and others. All we're hoping for is that all of us would try and kind of get a little closer towards explaining how things could actually be achieved, explaining how they could be monitored, and explaining how we could sustain them. Because there are no major debate on substance issues, but there are also challenges in relation to follow through and implementation of the decisions well taken. Thank you very much, and we wish us all good luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Zondi. So now we have heard about the overview of the Inception Conference. We had Elizabeth speaking about the reflections on the G20 and multilateralism in 2025. And we've had the approach that the South African T20 process will take within the framework of South Africa's G20 presidency. So at this point, I would like to invite the respondent from the T20 South Africa's Advisory Council which will be given by Mavis also Giampi. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, and thank you for the invitation to speak at the event. A couple of things that I wanted to raise. The first one is that in what is a complex geopolitical space, and very often starts to feel a bit fragmented, the focus of the T20 on really building on past T20s recently and also looking forward is critical. Very often, as we talk about the G20 in the current environment, people ask questions like, what is the value of the G20? Is it still necessary in this space? The G20 is critical. It remains fundamental in helping us navigate the complexities that the world is facing, and especially for Africa's first G20 that it will be hosting, thinking through how Africa benefits from the decisions that are made at this G20. So in line with this, a few things that I wanted to raise. One, the focus on the topics is critical. The topics that have been picked by the T20 are topics that are fundamental in moving forward the world that we are navigating right now. But it also means that the policy briefs that we develop out of these papers, out of these topics, need to be focused. They need to be able to give policy advice that is thinking through some really strong, quick wins that can be negotiated and agreed at this G20, as well as laying the foundations for medium and long-term ambitious plans. So as each of the authors of the policy briefs are thinking through the recommendations that they are putting together, I implore all of you, think through what are tangible, ambitious wins that we can push through in this complex geopolitical space. But simultaneously, do not lose our medium to long-term ambition for a much better world, in line with the overall ambition of the South Africa G20. The second thing is really thinking through the other groups of the T20. So for example, the C20. How do we ensure that the recommendations coming through these policy briefs are not just going to policymakers to inform the decisions that are being made, but it's also feeding into the C20 process to inform advocacy at G20 country level? Because policies are formed by governments, civil society play a fundamental role in advocating for those policies to be adopted. And as technical advisors, our job is to draft these policy papers in a way that can be adopted by not just the policymakers, but also the civil society organizations that we desperately need to advocate for these recommendations. And then finally, the point I wanted to raise was around what is it at the end of this process do we want to be known for as a South Africa T20? One of the things that the Advisory Council will be thinking about is, at the end of the year, what are the top 3 things that can we say the T20 contributed to, used evidence-based policy to influence, was adopted, and led to real change within the system. And I think as everybody in the working groups are thinking through their priorities, let's be very intentional about what would we say are the wins for this T20 that we can see from the final communique in the G20 that will then follow through to the US and subsequent G20s going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those remarks. So at this point, I think we've had quite a mouthful of remarks from the respective colleagues. So I think we will just have a quick video reel on the South African G20 presidency. after which we will then move to the South African T20 Sherpa. And then at that point, when he's done with the remarks, we'll then take the questions and answers. Please proceed, colleagues, and play the reel. Thank you.
South Africa, born 30 years ago as a new nation, united and free from apartheid. A great wave of global solidarity of the peoples of the world, led by the United Nations, championed our freedom. Today, South Africa is a flourishing democracy, a multicultural and diverse nation. We are Africa's most industrialized economy, a country of breathtaking beauty. Our greatest strength is our people. We remain rooted in our African identity, but fully integrated into the global community of nations. We are a country that fights for peace and justice. We are honored to lead the Group of 20 from 1 December 2024. South Africa is committed to multilateralism with United Nations at its center. South Africa's vision is a world that is people-centered, development-orientated, and inclusive. A community of nations that leaves no one behind. This dictum is rooted in the African philosophy of Ubuntu. We have thus chosen the theme, Solidarity, Equality, Sustainability for our G20 presidency. Guided by our theme, we will use our G20 presidency to refocus global attention on the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of development in the economies of Africa and the global South. This includes a focus on critical issues such as inequality, employment, food security, and artificial intelligence. The symbol of our G20 presidency is the magnificent King Protea, our national flower, which has a rare ability to regenerate. It is a symbol of renewal, resilience, and hope. It symbolizes South Africa's intention to deliver a positive and solution-driven G20 presidency. By reigniting our common humanity, South Africa will use its G20 presidency to harness the power of global collective energy to confront our common challenges. And as we have done over the past 30 years, we will serve to bridge the gap between the global North and the global South, being uniquely positioned at a point of intersection between both worlds. We are ready. Are you? We welcome you to Africa. We welcome you to South Africa. G20 South Africa 2025. Solidarity, equality, sustainability.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, colleagues, for that. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to warmly welcome the South African T20 Sherpa, Mr. Zain Dango, who will then be giving us the introduction to the G20 South Africa. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. And
Good afternoon.
You can all see me and hear me. I know that the background that you have is going to interfere with our background, so you may not see me. So, thank you. All right. I'll be quick. And firstly, I'd like to say, it's an honor for me representing the South African government, both as the Director General of DIRCO, but also as the G20 Sherpa, to be part of this very important Inception Conference of the T20. I think that, the speakers before me were also the co-conveners of the T20 for South Africa, have already outlined the key themes. So I don't want to spend too much time on the themes because I think, we all know what the themes are and why it's important. But, as Elizabeth pointed out, we also, and Pilani and Sipamandla pointed out really, that this T20 takes place in a particular context, which is perhaps quite unique in the last 5 or 10 years. We know that the Indian presidency, before that, the Indonesian presidency took place in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. And then the Brazilian presidency then also had the added dimension of what was happening in Gaza and the Middle East. Keep it on. Thanks. So I do think that what I want to do, instead of going through the details of the themes, and we can engage more on that, including also the details of the task forces, is perhaps have a reflection from our side just on what the process has been thus far, perhaps with a focus on some of the discussions that took place at the first meeting of foreign ministers of the G20, because I think what emerged from that meeting is quite important. And then also I want to then have a discussion from our side on what we see the role of the T20 could be in ensuring that this G20 is successful on African soil. So perhaps just to look at what emerged from the G20 meeting of the foreign ministers meeting. What happened, and this is important given the context, all the delegates participating in that meeting reaffirmed the theme of South Africa's presidency, which the other speakers have spoken about, which is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And this means that the themes, which essentially are not, they're not new, they emerge from what Italy began. Italy's presidency came in the midst of COVID, and there already the need for cooperation and a level of interdependence was really important, and that guided the extent to which the leaders could agree on key issues on global health. And of course, we saw the focus then on the Sustainable Development Goals that Indonesia, India, and Brazil took up. So it was important for us to have these themes reaffirmed in the context of global challenges on the values underpinning these themes. And I think that is an important takeaway for us from the very first meeting of the foreign ministers, and foreign ministers most likely are those closest to leaders and maybe engaging with the leaders around what the key issues would be in the summit. Okay. We had a finance deputies meeting taking place soon after that, and there the theme was not overwhelmingly supported. And we bring that to the fore because these are the kind of issues that the T20 would need to engage with. Can you hear me? Is it the...
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Yes.
Oh, okay, I just thought I had somebody. So the theme is, the difference between the two meetings indicates that there may be discussions within the government components of the G20 around the themes and contestations on the values underpinning these themes, particularly the need for solidarity between countries, and the notion of equality, and some of the issues linked to that, such as gender equality and the specific human rights of women, and we can go into details on some of these in question. So what else was important was that, and just taking from the earlier discussion, was there was a reaffirmation also that the G20 is an important institution in the global governance architecture, but it was described as the premier forum for international economic cooperation. And that's important in the context where we now see that global trading system may be under threat. And from our perspective, given our theme, it's not just the global trading system, it's about fair trade. These are the kind of issues that was also recently negotiated and engaged. Negotiated is a bad term, but engaged at the Security Conference. So,
I want to ride the bus. Oh, girl, you better answer me. They say all kind of stuff.
Colleagues, may we please mute our mics?
Other folk gonna talk about you till the day you die. It ain't nothing you can do. It ain't what people call you, it's what you answer to. Come on. Where you going? To the bus. Come on. Hold on, bus driver. I think somebody chilling on bus. This here is a friend of mine. And she been telling me that a few of y'all been saying some stuff about her. I'm gonna tell you right now, if I catch one of y'all saying something, it's gonna be me and you. You hear me? Whoa, lady. I know humble, but I killing me.
Colleagues, may we please mute our mics? Thank you.
proliferation. But it also underscored the need for collective responsibility for stewardship of the global economy and what will be necessary to foster what would be the requirements for sustainable and also resilient and interdependent and inclusive supply chains and global growth. There was also a real commitment coming through the various statements from the foreign ministers from the other G20 countries, the importance to support developing countries in the midst of this global crisis, but also to ensure that we improve on at national and international level the policy and resourcing requirements to achieve the sustainable development goals. So there, I think the foreign ministers just noted with concern that there is slow progress, particularly with only 5 years to go before we have to report on the Agenda 2030 targets. Then on global governance issues, the foreign ministers had a long discussion on that, and they stressed that the ongoing conflicts across the globe are detrimental to economic development and the attainment of the SDGs, and a discussion on the root cause issues that much of the global conflicts we see could also be because of the growing inequalities within and between countries. And this is no longer just a slogan that we use in negotiation terms, but there is a global growth in inequality within countries, and there's a link between the abilities of national countries to deal with inequality and the kind of global frameworks that give rise to and sustain inequalities between countries. So that was also a discussion. Furthermore, the geopolitical divisions have contributed to what was termed a climate of distrust, but also distrust and uncertainty. And there was a real sense that the current climate, if we don't deal with it well, could unravel progress we've made over the last decade or so on issues such as dealing with poverty, inequality, resolving armed conflict, but also importantly, the important issues of climate change and the linking between science and the reality of climate change and the actions required, the pandemics, not just COVID, but also future pandemics, and the threat of nuclear proliferation was high on the agenda of the foreign ministers, and felt that the G20 needed to pronounce on that. So that was the backdrop really for a discussion that the foreign ministers then engaged in, where they noted with some distress the immense human suffering across the world because of war and conflicts. And important, I think they then affirmed that all parties, and parties in this case would be states and non-state actors, must comply with the obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Now, this was a big discussion topic during the last week of the Brazilian presidency. And there was agreement on the fact that no country or actor should be left out of the accountability loop. So I think it was again reaffirmed by all the delegates participating at this meeting. And they discussed the specific conflict areas. And I'm not going to go into those details, but I think the principle was underscored that if we are to deal with this in a way that is just, that the principles of international law and the institutions of global governance associated with that need to be strengthened and protected. And this, again, as Elizabeth underscored, is that the multilateral system then needs to be protected and reformed. A huge focus by Brazil, South Africa, and others on the need to reform the multilateral system to make it more aligned with the needs of developing countries. But reform does not mean dismantle. And there was a sense that we needed to work collectively to ensure that we reform the institutions of global governance to be fit for purpose and to be really attuned to the needs of the global community on multiple areas, whether it's peace and security and development. So reform is on the entire system, not just the Security Council. It includes the international financial architecture, which is specifically the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO. Again, on the discussions of the WTO, reform of the WTO was not the issue. I think there was agreement that the WTO needs to be reformed, but there was also huge discussions that the WTO needed to be protected. So that's the backdrop then on the issues that the foreign ministers felt were important. I'm not going to go into some of the other details, like the approaches then to the various task forces. We can deal with that in the question and answer session. But I thought I should take the time then to look at, if that's the backdrop and the context and the challenges that emerged from the very first foreign ministers meeting and repeated somewhat in the first meeting of foreign finance ministers and leaders of our reserve banks, what is the role of the T20 then? And as the speakers in the opening segment brought about, is that the value of the T20 is that it brings together some of the world's sort of sharpest thought leaders, some of the best think tanks that we have. It brings a research capacity from the global north and the south with a common purpose to drive evidence-based policies. But this now, even as was pointed out in the reflection, this is perhaps one of the more consequential G20 on how the intersection between values and interests are going to be played out. There's a focus now from some that we should be less focused on the values that bring us together, and those values are key to the themes that we've chosen in South Africa, but also previously in Brazil, and that we should be looking at our own narrow national interests. And the result is that if one looks at the events of the last few days, is that the global trading system is now under the spotlight, if not under threat. The institutions responsible for global governance, particularly those holding us all accountable, is under threat. So if we think of the T20 bringing together some of the best minds and research capacities globally, and they're going to be producing issue papers with recommendations that may find its way, and I believe it should find its way, into the leaders' declaration and discussions, together with some of the other engagement groups, as already been mentioned. These are the kind of issues that I think that, irrespective of the topics that you have chosen, and I think the topics that you've chosen are aligned with these imperatives, must look at not just what has happened over the last 5 years, but just looking at what is happening now, and how do we deal with what is happening now in a way that lays the basis for the G20 to remain relevant, but that the G20, as a plurilateral platform, can still deliver to the rest of the international community the kinds of thinking and recommendations that will allow for the sustainable development, climate change, inclusive growth, and a more peaceful world, and that the relevance of it is such that people take it seriously. I think the T20, together with ourselves as the presidency of the G20, is going to have to work in such a way that we don't deliver the lowest common denominator this year, in order just to have an agreement that is based on the minimum that we can agree on. I think that through your work and the kind of documents that you're going to bring into the discussion space, we need to challenge ourselves and other governments to be ready to take up solutions based on what the real problems are, and not just the easy, quick wins to have a document on paper that we can say, through some form of acclamation, we have agreement. So let me end there, and just to thank you again for inviting us. And obviously there's a question and answer session, but I thought it's best to take this approach rather than to just go through the various task forces that we've outlined, because I think you do know them, you know the theme, and let's rather have a discussion based on what the challenges and the context is. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Mr. Dango. And I do understand that you may have to leave us very shortly. So I would like to quickly invite the questions based on the remarks that we've had so far since started the program. Please, may you kindly shoot straight to the point that you're trying to make, so that you'll be able to hear from several colleagues. So I'll be taking hands now for this Q&A discussion. Thank you. May I start with, sorry, I'm just trying to, Maria, please unmute and proceed. Maria Rodriguez.
Yes, good morning or good afternoon. I'm the president of a foundation of the European Union, so I'm speaking from Brussels now. And many thanks for this great introduction. I would like to come with a question, which is the following. From the European side, we fully share the concerns expressed by South African Sherpa right now on the risk of international cooperation being undermined by short-sighted national interests. And this can bring problems for a rule-based order, a better global governance in trade, in climate, in digital transformation, in access to proper financing for development. So we are very concerned with this. We think that G20 and the South African leadership can move in the right direction. And so my question is the following. This year, we have important events organized by G20, but also important events organized by the United Nations. So the Financing for Development Conference, the Conference on Social Development, and then the COP30. So my question is, how can South African G20 presidency also push these United Nations events in the right direction in order to implement the Pact of the Future we just adopted last September? So this is my question.
Thank you so much. Seshradi and then Donovan, in that order. Please proceed, Seshradi. Okay, please go ahead, Donovan, please go ahead. Can we assist Donovan and mute colleagues? I see is saying the hand is up, but unsure how to unmute. Can we please assist with that? Donovan, I understand that you're unmuted, so please proceed. Okay, may I have Rania?
I don't know if you hear me.
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Yes, please proceed. We could hear you, but it seems like you have muted yourself again. So if you could please unmute and then proceed with the question.
Okay. That's okay now, I think. My name is Dr. René Massiga Diouf. I participate from Senegal. I'm the President, Executive Director of African Journalist Forum. I have 2 or 3 questions. The first is, we know now we have many conflict in Africa. In West DRC, the situation is very bad. And we have there some South African soldiers. How G20 in South African leadership can help to resolve it? It is my first question. The second is, it is important for Africa, particularly as a government. How can be this implication? How can be their implication in their in the G20 governance? Does African Union implicate in the process? It is the third question. I apologize because you understand I come from a French country. That's why my English is not very, very clear. I try just to ask my question in this language.
We could hear you very clear. We heard you very clear. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And I hope the speakers took note of
Yes.
that question. So I will next have Ame. If you could please keep the questions short and straight to the point. Please proceed, Ame. If you could unmute yourself and please proceed. Ame Abdurrahman, yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Please
Yeah,
proceed.
okay. Thank you very much. My name is Ame Abdurrahman. I am from European Union in Ireland, and I'm really pleased to see that our African country has this opportunity to lead the world, and I'm really very proud of you guys. My question is really, as an African diaspora who were displaced due to all the climate, war, and undemocratic states in Africa, we are really, really happy to see you. But at the same time, we want to contribute to our country back home. And I have proposed an agenda, and last time sent to our President Ramaphosa, and also Elon Musk and other people to cooperate on this issue, how we can do what we can do about Africa. And this is mainly the issue of African diaspora and how we can contribute. I will send you the link down here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. So I will take, the intention is to take 5 hands, but now I'll take just 2 from the Q&A chat box. So the first one by SAIIA Ramfa is, how is South African presidency taking forward the concerns of the Global South in the areas of climate change while calling for the reforms of the financial institutions like the World Bank, IMF, and IFISA? And then Kabelo Mamabolo is asking, given the policy briefs submitted by T20 South Africa and considering South Africa's T20 presidents, what specific measurable and time-bound commitments will be made to ensure that the proposed policies translate into tangible benefits for African nations, moving beyond implied benefits to address the continent's unique challenges and promote sustainable development and sustainable development growth? So colleagues, I'd like to begin by inviting the response from our G20 Sherpa, who of course has to leave us very shortly. So I'll begin, as opposed to starting from the top, I'll begin with him to give his remarks in response to the question, some of the questions that are directed to the South African G20 presidency. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Tango.
Thank you very much. I'll take the easy ones, and the Pilani, Elizabeth, and Sipamandla can deal with the more difficult ones. I think the first question really dealt with the, after the, on the concerns about the current context, but to what extent can we, or are we intersecting with other key events? So we are very mindful that the issues that we're discussing as the president of the G20 is going to be aligned with discussions that take place in Seville, with the Financing for Development Conference, the Conference on Social Development, but also, importantly, the COP that will be hosted in Brazil. So already there's discussions between South African President Ramaphosa, President Lula, and the President of Spain about, as the hosts of these three important events, to what extent should there be collaboration, not just on the thematic issues, but overall to ensure that the multilateral system that lays the basis for these kinds of discussions can yield tangible benefits. And also to ensure that multilateralism itself isn't put under threat, because if it is put under threat, then not only is the G20 under threat this year, but I think also the success of the FFD, which is really critical at this stage. And this is going to be a really consequential COP conference as well. All of them are enabled to be as successful as possible. So collaboration is going to be important, and we will be, engaging with the leadership from Brazil and Spain on this on a regular basis. And already I can tell you that these discussions are ongoing, and also that our missions in New York, where a lot of these negotiations are taking place and preparatory conferences are taking place, are engaging on an ongoing basis. But these three events are going to be discussing critical issues that we hope will make a difference to some of the issues that have been raised, particularly to what extent can they be implementable, and I'll come to that. There was a question, I think, from Renee from Senegal that dealt with many conflicts in Africa. And so the G20 will need to engage with how to resolve conflicts, but it's not the forum for doing this fundamentally. The G20 is a ginger group. It can raise concerns and also identify solutions, but ultimately the solutions to many of these conflicts are going to be through the various negotiated processes, whether it's in the African-led ones around the DRC. So you're finding that there's SADC level meetings, ECOWAS level meetings around what needs to be done. What the G20 should do and must do is ensure that any peace processes, whether it's in Africa, the Middle East, or in Europe, is guided by the principles of inclusiveness, is guided by a due diligence on the international legal frameworks, and that it doesn't give rise to more and more impunity, because then we just have a cycle of impunity. As one of the, I think it was one of the prosecutors at the International Criminal Court said, it's rinse and repeat, because if you don't deal with the root causes and impunity, then you'll have cycles of peace talks that lead to temporary pieces and not a just peace. So I think that's what we're putting on the agenda, was affirmed by the foreign ministers attending those meetings. And hopefully it will also find resonance in the African Union and the Peace and Security subcommittees there, but also at the UN Security Council. So I think that is an important point to note. I think the question really for me on the African diaspora. So I think the various engagement groups, the T20, the C20, and others, may want to look at to what extent they bring in credible communities of the diaspora, but also from the Caribbean, which is part of the extended diaspora, and look to what extent we can get the kind of evidence and suggestions for how the G20 in particular can highlight the concerns of the diaspora community around, if it's good governance issues, climate change issues, the pull and push factors that have given rise to such a sizable diaspora community. And we must note that some of the people that are classified as diaspora left voluntarily because they may not have liked the countries that they came from positions on equality and sustainability. It's my tongue-in-cheek remark to one of the names you've mentioned as being part of the diaspora, particularly from South Africa. And then I think there was a question on tangible benefits. And that's why we're having a G20 at 20 review as part of our priorities, because we think that significant agreements have been made over the last 5 years, in particular, on what needs to be done on climate change, on sustainable development, on financing for development. What we need to do is to translate that into implementable projects. Now, the G20 does not make binding agreements. It makes recommendations that countries can follow or should follow. It also allows for the G20 to influence, for example, what happens at the Financing for Development Conference, what happens at the COP. And there you can have agreements that could become binding. And this is what we must be very conscious of, is that the G20 can influence what happens in other fora where decision-making is more binding. The G20 is an informal grouping, but our review is looking at how do we ensure that some of the very key decisions that have been made, particularly on the financial architecture, can be implemented. But for that to happen, it needs to find some space in the forums where more binding decisions are made, and that is the UN-led institutions and fora. I think, Dr. Duma, that is the questions that I thought I should answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Dango, and much appreciated for gracing us with your presence here today. So without wasting any more time, I'd like to proceed to the other speakers to give their reflections on the questions raised. I'd like to request that colleagues, you keep your reflections and remarks just to 2 minutes, so that you will then proceed with the programs. Just a summary of just straight to the point responses to the questions in 2 minutes, if you may, colleagues, please. So I will start with Dr. Mthembu, and then Elizabeth, and then Prof. Zondi, in that order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'll be brief. I think it's some of the other fora our Sherpa has mentioned, which are going to be important to actively engage in. There's also, of course, it's going to be important that I think the T20 ensures that they maintain a presence, certainly in the various global fora, including the more regional engagements, whether it's the African Union Summit, whether it's in the second World Summit on Social Development hosted in Qatar, but also in terms of reflecting. I mean, there's a question around the Summit of the Future and some of the outcomes. It's going to be important, where possible, to have a presence also on the sidelines of the General Assembly. And here at times we'll be relying on partnering with these various institutions that are part of this ecosystem within the T20. I think also just a last point, I think we've been quite deliberate about ensuring that indeed this is not just a South African presidency, but that it is a presidency with a strong, that is strongly rooted on the African continent. And so the role of the African Union will be important. We are doing various outreaches to the African Union, and Prof. Zondi had made mention of the high-level Africa dialogue that will be taking place in April. That involves very directly various institutions within the African Union. And so that's a very deliberate thing. We've also been deliberate about ensuring that even in all the different task forces, it's not just about having a South African co-chair, it's about also having an African co-chair. Same thing within the advisory council. And so those are some of the steps that we certainly are taking to ensure that it is as inclusive as possible, but that it also has a very strong Africa centeredness throughout 2025. Let me stop there for the other speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Mthembu. Elizabeth, please proceed.
Yes, great. Thanks, Duma. Just a couple of points relating to add to the comments about the African Union and Africa more broadly. We've also reached out to a number of African think tanks. Some of them have already been part of the T20 process in other instances, and that also reflects on what Professor Zondi said earlier. With the conference at the end of April, we're aiming to bring in and to widen the the number of African think tankers, academics, researchers who are part of the G20. And we hope that this is, to bring them in to see a continuation beyond this G20. It's a great opportunity because we're chairing. So there are a number of initiatives there in that regard. I've also picked up a couple of questions in the chat, in the Q&A, and I thought maybe I'd respond to those. I think it was Professor Zondi I think it was also Mavis who mentioned the importance of the C20, and I think that has also been reflected in the comments of Professor Zondi and Pilani. We, C20 is an important forum. The Y20, as Zondi said, it's the B20. Somebody asked a question whether we will be engaging with the B20. They've also just launched last week. I was at the launch in Cape Town. There are a number of synergies that can take place, or at least exchanges on some of the themes that we are focusing on as a T20, and they are in the same way with the C20. So absolutely, we are going to look out and create these opportunities. We've already been in touch with a number of our engagement groups. And then just lastly, there was another poster from Lydia Cabral in the questions that talked about the fact that there are obviously some overlaps across task forces, and you're absolutely right. It's important, really, particularly when we are trying to draw up a high-level communique, to actually make sure that we build on those synergies. The best way of doing that is to make sure that over the course, particularly of the first 6 months, as everything is coming together with the policy briefings, that task force chairs and co-leads actually create opportunities to engage across task forces, and also with the advisory council. And we'll certainly be trying to create some of these opportunities to make sure that the collective wisdom across task forces actually can be pushed with a coherent message. We're also looking to have sort of separate engagements among the task forces with the relevant working groups, where there will be an opportunity for task force chairs to sort of raise some of the issues that are on their agenda and that they think are important, both in terms of looking at the longer term, but also in terms of looking at some short-term wins. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Professor Zondi?
Thank you very much. Let me just tackle a series of questions that relates to participation still in the processes right now. Since the abstracts, the call for abstract has closed, and there's a process right now of giving back feedback to the authors of abstracts, which would lead to policy briefs and all of that part is closed. But there are other avenues. There's an opportunity for convening side events. You would check on the website. We'll put the website in the charts right now. The team would put the website on the chart for you to click on it. For side events that you convene together with the T20, so that you can feed off ideas and have structured conversation in specific areas and stuff like that. There's also an opportunity of getting close to the other dialogue, the Africa High-Level Dialogue, the midterm conference, and others that will still be present. With regards to alignment with Africa, we've been saying now that the alignment is very, very strong. First, the African Union's own priorities for G20 are integrated to the work program that we have right now. They're integrated fully into the work program of all the task forces, so the priorities are enmeshed already. Secondly, then there's this T20 Africa High-Level Dialogue, the formal part of our T20 program, organized together with agencies of the African Union Commission, the African Development Bank, the Economic Commission for Africa, and other continental bodies. That is going to provide a huge two-day platform for enmeshing the views and making sure that Africa's interests and Global South interests are foregrounded. And of course, therefore, the African Union will also be represented in the midterm conference in June, and again in the T20 summit in November. So that is fully taken care of, and it's very well. Now, with regards to a question about, but if the G20 is non-binding, what's the point? Are we not wasting time? Now, colleagues will have to be reminded that international diplomacy has always operated on that basis. Very little of global consensus is made out of binding decisions that can be enforced by some group of soldiers or army from somewhere. It's always been about consensus building and building momentum over a period of time. If you look at a sustainable development agenda, it was not legislated, but it's now completely accepted throughout the world. It's being implemented all everywhere. International diplomacy work via persuasion, continuous dialogue, inclusive conversation. That is why that even the noises coming out of the US do not worry those who are involved in international diplomacy, because it's just how it is. It's going to be persuasion. That is why the T20 idea is that we are a troika. It is Brazil, it is South Africa, it is United States. We don't have to agree, but we have to converse. Dialogue is absolutely important, and we're going to keep in dialogue and find areas of common ground. We'll always find some areas of common ground and work on that basis and go forward. And some things will be clear further down the line. What we want to make sure is that the G20 remains the G20, and that the agenda that we inherited from Brazil, we take it further to the United States, and they will have inherited because they would have participated in it this year. That's just how international diplomacy, that's why it's so interesting about it. It's that it's continuous persuasion, continuous dialogue, and always looking for some form of consensus. And there are differences too huge that you cannot find some form of consensus. And that's the beauty of international diplomacy. Let's keep trying. And we're hoping that people will make contribution through these policy briefs and abstract that relate also to how do we better implement what we've reached consensus on. And that is why we ask people to look at what has been agreed in Indonesia, in India, in Brazil, rather than inventing new things. Look at what has been agreed and then say, this is what is missing, this is how we could implement this better, so that the process is assisting the G20 to implement outcomes that are good for the peoples of the world, especially peoples on the margins of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Zondi. I think all three of you have responded to the questions quite accurately. And I believe that if there are some follow-ups, the colleagues can use the chat function, the Q&A, and then you can address them using that tool. I would like us now to take us to the second part of our program. And now we are hearing from the task forces. So we will begin with Task Force 2 on digital transformation. And Dr. Alison Gilwald will be giving us the statement of intent from Task Force 2. As I welcome her. Please proceed, Dr. Gilwald. Dr. Gilwald, can you hear me?
We get sufficient coverage of the issues we need.
Alison, you are unmuted. I see you were trying to connect via audio.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm terribly sorry. I was disconnected and then I just rejoined. I'm sorry if my audio came on.
Not a problem. Please proceed.
Sorry, with my disconnection, I've also lost track of the program. Can I make the input from the digital transformation track?
Yes, yes. Oh, sorry. I did not know that you missed that introductory part. My apologies. Yes, so I was just Yes, please proceed. Yeah, I've already told the colleagues that you will now be hearing from Task Force 2 on digital transformation. Please proceed.
Great, thanks very much. And I'm assuming that the Department of Communication hasn't spoken before me, because I was waiting for them to speak first. So perhaps they will speak after me, because I think there's been quite a lot of alignment between the Digital Economy Working Group of the Sherpa track and the AI Task Force and Data Governance Task Force, but I'll let the department speak to that. Just to say that the Digital Transformation Task Force, which is co-led by Stephanie Diefdien and Teki Akatur from Ghana, and both of whom, together with numerous other of our task force members, have been involved very much with the Brazilian T20, which for those of you who haven't been involved in the T20s before, really opened up the T20 from the traditional sort of Ivy League Northern European and North American think tanks to Global South think tanks, with just a lot of participation across many tracks, significantly 5 out of the 6 women, and then a global South leadership as well. So we have been working, several of us, across civil society and within think tanks and academia, and together very closely also with the Brazilian government in the digital transformation area, on this integrated progressive digital transformation agenda, starting with India, which began to open up some of these areas to other think tanks, other than the sort of well-known think tanks, and particularly to challenges around the global South. And then, of course, with the G20, Indian G20, very much around that, their sort of flagship digital public infrastructures that have now become another catch-all for policymakers and donors and multilateral agencies. And then in the context of Brazil, very much focusing on a lot of the big issues that were emerging out of the global developments around the Global Digital Compact, and specifically the recognition of the importance of data governance in this data-driven global economy, and of course with the enhanced data-driven technologies that are becoming general purpose technologies and affecting life, society, economy in such fundamental ways. So that integrated digital agenda, digital transformation agenda, has been carried through into the Digital Economy Working Group, which the T20 concept note and the agenda, you will see mirrors or supports. It's a very much smaller agenda, as the leads of the T20 were speaking about, consolidating and doing what we can manage. We're clearly much smaller than some of these other entities, but we've got a very strong base and support to build on, taking it forward. So there are 3 main areas, and as I said, this is this opportunity for South Africa at this moment, and despite all the complexities and geopolitical challenges that we face, is that a lot of the ground has been laid. Obviously, going forward and getting consensus on many of these things within the Digital Economy Working Group will be tricky, although I think it's incumbent on us, as the Sherpa has said, to continue to push forward those boundaries and the advances that have been made around bringing majority world issues to the very complex issues of global governance, of these general purpose technologies, but also these global digital public goods and how they are realized, particularly in an African context with this African T20 and G20. So the 3 main issue areas that emerge from this are around digital inclusion. That, just to give you a little bit of the history on that, that is historically within the multilateral organizations, and even within the previous 2 G20s, continued to focus on the connectivity issues and the challenges of the digital divide, which go right back to WSIS, the World Summit on the Information Society, which we're doing globally, the +20 review this year, with sort of very significant context in which the G20 is happening, building on the Global Digital Compact, as I said. And the important part of the South African agenda on this, and particularly within the T20 as well, is extending the notion of digital divide to one of digital inequality. That a lot of the evidence, which we hopefully will be bringing in these briefs and we have brought previously, is demonstrating that there's not only supply side challenges, which all these multilateral projects, Connecting Humanity, etc., tend to focus on, but that we've got particularly demand side challenges in Africa. And these are fundamental human development challenges. Cost of devices and everything is attached to one's education and income and employment and all these sort of things. So that even when we have connectivity, we are still going to have massive issues of digital inequality, which we see in our work. So we have framed that agenda item as kind of, connectivity, but beyond connectivity. Obviously, connectivity in Africa is still a big challenge in many ways, getting it affordable, but looking at the issues of digital inclusion, not only around broadband or internet or that, but actually around digital inclusion, around economic inclusion, around our preparedness for the next inevitable pandemic, to be able to digitally substitute, especially at a continental level, but global South level, in a way that we couldn't to mitigate the risks associated with COVID. So that's we've got a number of policy briefs in there. As is happening with global donors, agendas and fundings, a lot of shifting away, deflecting issues and funding towards the bigger issues of AI, or the bigger, sexier, shinier issues of AI. And of course, now digital public infrastructure is also getting a lot of attention. So far less attention going into these foundational inequality challenges, which really impact on what we can do with DPI, or what we can do with AI, or why we excluded from innovatively using AI. And so the agenda then is really cross-cutting. That digital inequality really impacts on some of the issues that have been looked at DPI. In response to the DPI question, the focus there is really in the South African agenda on extending that from the purely sort of technical and infrastructure focus of this, picking up from the G20 India, G20 Brazil call, and now on South Africa, to develop a data governance, an integrated data governance framework for DPI that is both human rights preserving, human-centric, but very importantly from the broader data governance work, that it's also looking at the uneven distribution of opportunities that go with these advanced technologies, go with the infrastructure access, but also the advanced technology of AI, which is the third area. It's called enhanced technologies, but obviously a lot of the input there has really been on the challenges around AI, a lot on the governance of AI, issues of disinformation, of course, quite important there, that aren't as strongly in the South African agenda as they were in the Brazilian agenda of the Digital Economy Working Group, but have come up here very strongly. And as I said, about 80 abstracts for the AI enhanced technology section, about 60 for DPI, and then only about 20 for digital inclusion. So important that we, but excellent ones across all. And as has been discussed, we've only got a far fewer number that we're going to be taking through. So 2025 from each group. So we'll be able to get some very strong evidence-based policy briefs, taking up these new areas, these areas of looking not only in the data area around harms and safeguards, but also around better distribution of these opportunities, around innovation opportunities, around local language modeling with data science, etc. So some very important crosscuts there. As always, the T20 worked very closely with the C20 in Brazil. We hope to continue to do so as well. In South Africa, a lot of the work that has gone on in the, sorry about that, that has gone on in the Global Digital Compact, a lot of that negotiation has been done through Global South Alliances that are sometimes think tank based, but also preparing that evidence, as Mavis was speaking about, for advocacy by civil society and digital rights workers across the globe. So just to say that on the cross task force collaboration that's been spoken about, very keen to do that. Obviously, the digital is a big crosscut for trade, for finance, for African Continental Free Trade Area, those kinds of issues that will have particular significance in this African G20, but then also our collaboration, which we have got agreement from the Department of Communication and also from the T20 Summit in Brazil, that we're going to try and feed that T20, the policy briefs, the evidence, much earlier on into the discussion processes so that it can inform the ministerial declaration or the discussions and negotiations leading up to the ministerial declarations, and forging ahead with the themes of equality, very importantly solidarity, and of course sustainability. There's a very big green and energy aspect to this digital agenda, particularly with these very resource intensive advanced technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gilwald. I can confirm that the government rep had not yet spoken before you, so we are actually about to get him now to then speak. And of course, he will be speaking about the G20 SA goals on the role of digital transformation in driving the sustainable development in the country and the continent. So I just want to quickly check with the team online. I'm being advised that he's having some connection issues, but that will be Mr. Jim Patterson who will be speaking to us about that. So he should be speaking to us just now. I'm just told that he's having some connection issues, but maybe while we are also waiting for him, I can maybe take a couple of discussion points. I think on what you have raised, Dr. Gilwald, we can then maybe begin the discussion on your part, and then once Mr. Patterson has given his remarks, we will then continue with where you will leave off yourself while you also take yours. So if the colleagues have some questions based on that submission from Task Force 2, I think I can take a hand or two while we are trying to get sort the connection issues with Mr. Patterson. So if there's any burning point, colleagues, you would like to raise, I'm told that he's joined. Please proceed, Mr. Jim Patterson. I had just told the colleagues here that you'll be speaking to us about the T20 SA goals on the role of digital transformation in driving development. So if you could please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good afternoon, colleagues. Sorry, I had a bit of a problem connecting. It seems that my laptop doesn't like Zoom for some reason. I'll be speaking really about the work of the Digital Economy Working Group, which is the responsibility of the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. We've had a process of engagement over the last probably about 8 months to look at a set of deliverables we think will support our development agenda and support the agenda of developing countries. As you know, within the G20 structure, developing countries are very much a minority, but we have had a succession of developing countries providing leadership to the G20, beginning with Indonesia in 2022, India in 23, and last year we had Brazil in 2024. And these countries have successfully advanced the agenda for developing countries within the context of the G20, and in particular the digital economy. So I think the onus is on us as South Africa to try and build on that work and make sure that we continue that foundation that has been laid, which we also contributed to, but which now we have a responsibility to try and drive. So in setting out our proposals, we looked at 4 key areas in the Digital Economy Working Group. We looked at connectivity for inclusive digital development. We looked at digital public infrastructure and transformation, and digital innovation ecosystems, particularly focusing on the role of SMEs, and also the need to empower micro enterprises with access to the digital economy. And then lastly, we looked at equitable, inclusive, and just artificial intelligence. So those were the 4 key areas that we identified for our work. And I think the first part of that, the connectivity for inclusive digital development, kind of sets the tone, because we're in a situation where 1/3 of the world is still not connected. And in our own country, we have very serious inequalities. And I think the problem we have is that failure to connect our citizens and bring them into the digital space and provide those opportunities that can flow from that creates the possibility that actually the digital divide is going to get worse, and social and economic inequality will also deepen. So that's, I think, a threat unless we try and resolve this. And I think what's been proven over the years is that there are still a lot of challenges towards connecting the unconnected, and capacitating people to participate with confidence and ease in the digital space. So we feel that there's still a lot of challenges that need to be addressed. And I think in our own country, we have very high levels of inequality. So there's nowhere really where these problems are not more pronounced than in our own country. So it's quite appropriate that we try and deal with this, because it underlies the issue of inequality throughout our priorities. And you'll recall that the overall themes of the presidency of South Africa, it was solidarity, quality, and sustainability. So I think the priorities we put forward speak directly to this challenge. So for us also around then the issue of looking at connectivity for inclusive digital development, we also, apart from recognizing the many challenges that we've encountered in trying to ensure that everybody does get connected and gets access and is able to use in a meaningful way the internet, and to be able to access and create and do business and so forth. Apart from those many challenges, I think what's also clear is that this work would be far more better designed and better informed if we had better data. And this is also a challenge that cuts across many developing countries in particular. It's been a feature in the G20's work previously. I think in Brazil, they did do some work around universal and meaningful connectivity. In Argentina, we also looked at data. I think also in Saudi Arabia during their presidency, we did. But I think here we're looking more around how to ensure funding to address the data gaps that we have, so that we can identify the information gaps and look at the monitoring and mapping of broadband, and particularly then looking at how people respond as well to looking at the income levels and the need to be able to look at pricing issues, the cost issues, and how people can access the internet, and what are the challenges that people face in doing so. Because I think as we move forward in the digital space, not being connected, it becomes an increasingly expensive, or increasingly disadvantages people from full citizenship, if you like. So I think these are the issues that we wanted to try and address on this topic. And then going forward, I think we also then the topic of digital public infrastructure and transformation. This builds on the work of previous presidencies, because I think it was introduced for the first time under the Indian presidency in 2023. And we advanced this discussion further during the Brazilian presidency, looking at, in particular, digital identities and data management of data around that, or governance of data. So we intended to advance this debate a bit further. We're interested in the transformational potential of digital public infrastructure, but also recognize the need for an approach which is inclusive, that enables everybody to access and benefit from digital public infrastructure. There's a lot of other issues around this, around ensuring that we build greater equality through being able to provide DPI to everybody. And I think, trying to avoid a situation where DPIs just disproportionately benefit those with access and leave out those that don't. We also think there's a lot of work to be done around the data aspects here, because there's different levels, but I think at one level that there's the governance issues around the use and management of data and how data is governed and privacy and so forth. But then there's also issues around providing access to data, and then there's the data interoperability that's required for DPIs to work effectively. But I think in that process of governments being able to manage their data better, then there's opportunities that arise about how that data can be used to inform public policy or investment and so forth. So there's a lot of aspects that arise that we wanted to look at. And then we also need to look at what are the potential harms that can arise from data-driven technologies. I think for us, there's also the part about looking at how DPIs, looking at how to measure the potential benefits of DPI investment in terms of the impact on citizens, on people, on beyond a cost-benefit, a traditional cost-benefit approach, which is often tempting for governments, but looking more broadly at some of the more intangible aspects about how it impacts people and what are the public values that can benefit society from this approach. We're also looking at MSMEs around this space and how this DPI can provide opportunities for the MSME ecosystem. So that was digital public infrastructure. And then we were looking at, on top of that, we had work around the SMME sector. So we were looking at two different main aspects here. It was digital innovation ecosystems and unleashing the potential of MSMEs. So I think we've had some success in realizing the potential of small, medium, and micro enterprises in driving innovation when given the opportunity. So we were looking at how do we build digital innovation ecosystems to benefit MSMEs. In this respect, we're going to be doing some research with the ITU on this, and we're also going to be doing an event in Cape Town in September to showcase innovation from SMMEs. And then there's going to be some work done with Research ICT Africa and the World Bank around especially micro enterprises to look at inclusion and in the digital economy, because obviously at this stage there's a lot, especially in our country, but in many developing countries, the micro enterprise and informal sectors are often unable to harness technical advances to improve their livelihoods and run their businesses. So this will look at really the ways in which we can achieve this and how it can benefit that sector and drive broader social and economic development. And then the last part is on equitable, inclusive, and just artificial intelligence. And this again also builds on the work that was done previously in India and Brazil. Before that, I think the only time we really got into artificial intelligence was looking at ethical principles during the Japanese presidency in 2019. But in India, during the summits from the Leaders' Declaration, there was quite a lot of output around artificial intelligence. And during the Brazilian presidency, they were looking at artificial intelligence as well to support socioeconomic development and the SDGs, particularly from the angle of empowering the public service. So we're looking really at how we can use AI for development, but we're also looking at how it can impact on inequality in numerous different ways. And also, I think previously during the Brazilian presidency, there was a lot of work on information integrity. And of course, this is an area which can be impacted on by the use of algorithms, especially in social media platforms. So this is also an area we're going to explore a little bit. But I think for us, there's a lot of work around access and use of data, and how that impacts on algorithms and the use of AI, and also the design of those algorithms. But also then about more broadly, especially in the developing country context, around investments, accessing the resources, capacity building, training, having the right kind of governance frameworks that can make sure that AI is used in a safe way, which benefits people, is people-centered and inclusive, and doesn't exacerbate inequality. So I think these are real dangers that often we talk about, and we get seduced easily by the idea that all of this technology can solve huge problems and make our lives better. And of course, I guess in many ways they can. But the flip side is that if we leave these to evolve without any kind of intervention or direction from a public policy point of view, then we may find that actually we achieve the exact opposites, and that we build greater inequalities and a more divided world. And I think that is kind of like the context we're facing right now in the world. I think these are very real dangers that need to be addressed. So I think this is why we kind of advanced these topics here. So there's quite a lot of unpacking to do in these areas. And we have specific deliverables for each of the different topics, which we will hope to successfully advance during our presidency and get buy-in from the G20 members. I will just say quickly that there's a good connection, I think, at the moment, which is helping us a lot in terms of driving a developing country perspective and a South African agenda. There's a good connection between ourselves and colleagues in the T20 group, because we've been working very closely with Alison Jewell in the research ICT Africa, as well as some other colleagues who are especially in academic networks in South Africa. So that's been able to assist us a lot and inform us. But we also recognize we've got a long way to go in terms of negotiating these different aspects in the G20 platform. So the work is not easy. But we appreciate the direction we've got so far. And I think this has been quite a valuable interaction. So I just wanted to highlight that because I'm speaking to the T20 that it'd be good to have this focus that can support the work. Not that that's directly your responsibility, but I think in the T20 you do have the opportunity to be slightly more forward-looking than we do in government. You've got that opportunity to be a little bit ahead of the curve. I guess it's yourselves in business, but in academia, there's probably more interest in developing public policy perspectives around the advancements of technology, whereas in the private sector, it's probably more a focus about the growth of those private entities and how they can capitalize.
Yes.
So are you telling me I'm finished now, Chairperson?
Yes. No. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those very comprehensive remarks, Mr. Patterson. And I believe that now, since we're going to be opening up for discussions, if you have some things that I do not have a chance to say, may add them out as you reflect on what the colleagues are raising. So now, of course, we are in a way racing against the clock now. So I would like to implore colleagues to keep their interventions. We would like to take as much as we can. So I'd like to request that if you make an intervention, to please keep it very short, so that you will have a much more, inclusive engagement. So the longer you go on, it means that someone else will not have a chance to speak. So I'd like to open up now for discussions. Solange, please. Solange Rosa. Please unmute and proceed. Solange? Please go ahead, Sylvester. Please unmute and make your point.
Thank you very much. I sent a message, and I would like to have light on 3 questions. The first was the one on the G20's role in development financing for Africa. Africa's financial needs for infrastructure, industrialization, and innovation remain significant. What new initiative could the G20 adopt to mobilize more substantial and attractive resources for the continent? The second, my second preoccupation was the following. In a world increasingly marked by geopolitical tensions and the fragmentation of global value chains, how can South Africa, as a G20 member, advocate for a more inclusive and balanced approach to international trade and investment in Africa? And the last preoccupation was the following. South Africa play a key role in global discussion on energy transition, particularly with its Just Energy Transition Program. How can the G20 better support African countries in adopting renewable energy while ensuring sustainable economic growth? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Solange, are you able to unmute and speak?
Malala, apparently she says that it was for Zane, but she's battling to unmute. But she had a question for Zane. So, yeah.
Okay. Let me just quickly check if we have anything on the chat. There is for here. Our question is asking, how do you see the digital transformation agenda also connecting with thematic issues, working groups such as the G20 Health working group, which has also had a strong focus on digital health transformation. I hope that is clear. An essential, this is by Chantel Naidu. An essential data agenda item is who owns the data, particularly climate data, generated through frontier technologies. Please consider adding this to the agenda. I think this is a comment Okay, if you could just make quick reflections on what has been raised, colleagues, in just briefly, and then we may proceed. Thank you. I will start with Dr. Gilward, and then I will follow with Mr. Peterson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, I do also acknowledge some very useful and important comments in the chat, and by people who've been working in digital transformation across Africa for many years, many of them diaspora and comrades. Just to say that, of course, this is a fantastic opportunity for Africa and for South Africa, but also for continental networks, continental agencies and institutions, important ones like the African Union, UNISA, of course, many of our RECs in their different formations, and the various digital, associated associations, regulatory networks that are being established by Competition Commission, looking at digital markets and what that means from a competition point of view, global markets or national markets, information regulators that are having to emerge and scurry and deal with these very big global governance issues, and of course these institutions engaging very actively in global governance, around Global Digital Compact, around WSIS, etc. So this is a fantastic opportunity for them. I think some of the comments are kind of reflecting that we would, of course, like even more, particularly on the T20. We've got fantastic, data scientists. We've got fantastic people working in digital policy that we would love to have had, more African expertise and experience on these committees. But of course, it is also an international event, and we have been able to draw on very significant Global South contributors from other parts of the world. But I do just want to say that I think both within the digital economy working group, which I'll leave for Jim to pick up, that there are, for the first time, really prominent role for African institutions. And as Jim has mentioned, some of the formal program doesn't necessarily accommodate some of the real boundary testing and important kind of regulatory and technology innovation things that are happening, across the continent and within different networks and formations. And I think the T20, both in the conference and in the commissioning of special papers that are cross-cutting, and I think particularly around, without preempting those discussions, particularly around data governance, which is affecting, it's central to the African Continental Free Trade Area, the trade track, cross-border data flows, taxation around digital and virtual international companies, etc. So I think it's a really big cross many of these. And just to say, without diminishing the very important aspect of health that was raised, but I don't have time to go into it. Obviously, the data management issues around health are one of the critical areas. Lots of global innovations, but also responses to COVID in dealing with that are very exciting work happening on the continent that really hopefully will be pulled into certainly the work of the Digital Economy Working Group and other trade, health and other area focuses. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gilward. Mr. Peterson, may we please have your reaction? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yes, some interesting comments. I think some of them are a little bit out of my scope, unfortunately. As much as I would love to comment, maybe I shouldn't. But just very briefly, I think, so we mentioned about AI and health and digital transformation in the health sector. I think one of the things I didn't mention in my presentation was that we established under the South African presidency as a priority of the presidency an artificial intelligence task force dealing with artificial intelligence, data governance, innovation for sustainable development. And this reflects the priority given by the presidency, not specifically by my department, but by the presidency and by DIRCO, in assessing what would be the most important things for South Africa to advance. They decided one of the most important things to grapple with would be around artificial intelligence. So we're working very closely with the Department of International Relations and with the Department of Science and Technology and Innovation on this special task force dealing with artificial intelligence, data governance and innovation for sustainable development. And part of that process is to then try and engage with all the different working groups, including health, about the work that they're doing in those sectors, and how that is an area where we can start connecting or looking at the need for specialists within the AI space, the different kinds of specialists, together with the sector specialists to understand the implications and the benefits and potential of AI and the use of data in those particular areas in which they operate. So that is one of the things we're doing to try and respond to that very question. And then I think there was somebody who mentioned, I didn't get the whole question, but who owns the data? Well, I agree, it's a huge issue. Who owns the data? We want to try and look at ways in which we can access more data, but also ensure that we use the data we have more effectively to support our own economy and our economic and social development. I won't talk about the geopolitical tensions. I think we all know what those are. But I think also we have in this AI task force initiatives around the African continent, and we will look at if there's ways in which we can encourage or harness greater investments, particularly in that space. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Peterson. I would like us to move on now to the G20 SA lead on trade and investment. I'm all told that she will be with us for a very brief moment. That will be Ms. Malebo Mabija Thompson, who will take us through the trade and investment from the government perspective. Thank you so much. If you may proceed. Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Thank
Hello.
You so much.
I hope you can hear me, and thank you very much. Let me just adjust that. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important event, which is part of South Africa's management and chairpersonship of the G20 for this year. Well, I will start first by thanking the organizers. Let me thank everybody who's also participating here for inviting us, and to also thank you for your valuable contribution to this big nation's project through the work that you are doing. Now, going back to what I've been asked to do today, which is just to give some remarks from a trade and investment perspective on what South Africa is doing. As you are aware, the G20 stands as a leading forum for international economic cooperation. It plays a pivotal role in shaping economic architecture of the world. It brings together the world's major economies and coordinate policies on global economic issues such as trade, development, and other key challenges. It's therefore a very important grouping, and it has influence that translates into how a number of other global groupings then shape a discussion and their input in resolving the world's challenges. Now, I'm sure maybe earlier or in the course of discussions, the meeting today would have reflected on the importance of G20, but I'll just reiterate that it's constituted by countries that account for about 79% of global GDP and 75% of world trade, and also 2/3 of the world's population. So just on the basis of those stats, the collective weight and economic power of the G20 can't be ignored, and therefore the G20 becomes central in addressing global challenges such as climate change, sustainable development, inclusive growth, and equitable access to resources, which no one country on its own can be able to resolve. Now, we were asked what is the big issue on the trade agenda that the G20 would be focusing on. I think the first issue is that we all need to acknowledge the fact that multilateralism is in distress, if I may put it like that. And there are challenges that multilateralism, as it is currently configured, has not been able to resolve. And for South Africa, we are saying it is crucial that multilateralism assists us to operate as a world in a manner that fosters solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And hence you will see the theme of South Africa's presidency of the G20 is fostering solidarity, equality, and sustainability. If all these multilateral organizations, all of us as humanity, are unable to resolve just these basic points of engagement of the human community, we will continue to move from crisis to crisis. So for us, South Africa's theme to the G20 presidency reflects a deep commitment to these particular ideals. And we believe that in our presidency, there is an opportunity that we can recover, we can reshape, and we can rebuild the multilateral system so that we make it more fit for purpose. Now, for trade and inclusive growth, South Africa will work to promote principles for trade and inclusive growth that are aimed at addressing redistributive effects of trade that result in adverse outcomes for economically excluded regions of the world. What am I saying? Is that trade is important, and trade helps with development, but what we have seen is that even within trade, based on some of the rules of trade, the distributive effects of trade hasn't helped much with development, and we want to deal with that. And that is why we are foreseeing this G20 as a G20 particularly of Africa cooperation and bringing Africa at the center of resolving some of the issues that the world faces. We see it helping us to implement the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and also the adjustment fund that is required for us to take that forward, and the work on transitioning our economies to a more cleaner path. We see it helping with decarbonization, value chains, digitization, and pharmaceuticals. And we think when we start framing these issues in a way that take into account the development context of many countries that are on the African continent and also of the global south, we will have an important input in ensuring that these things move beyond just big statements and they go into the realm of reality, because the solutions now are taking also many people with them, as opposed to those solutions that have tended to have the effect of excluding many in the resolution of some of the issues. And we see an important point in the negotiations, and what we can come up with to help us with a responsive trade and investment agenda that addresses these things that are called global commons, the things that affect all of us. They include the digital and energy transition. And also we see it as helping us, as I indicated, with dealing with global issues like climate change on the green side, the green industrialization and investment. And there, looking at it, not just as an industrialization opportunity for the few, but as a way of life for the world. And starting those discussions, framing those discussions correctly, it really is important for Africa's development. And we have some of the key inputs that the world needs for this. We need a framework that allows that everybody develops as we are responding to what is essentially a global crisis of climate change. And then on the WTO side, most of you will know that for the most part, the world trades under the framework that has been developed by the WTO. And it's our view that while the WTO may have many weaknesses, our job is not to completely dismantle a system that has created predictability, that allows movement of goods, that also facilitates investment and jobs, including on the continent, but rather to strengthen it. Because truth be told, there are areas in the WTO that are very, very worrisome, that negotiations that ought not to take as long as they take have just been protracted unnecessarily. And therefore, on that score, we're saying don't throw the baby with the bathwater. Let us rebuild and build for better outcomes for the rest of the world. So we are pushing for a deliberate discussion on the development dimensions of the WTO, and also of ensuring an efficient WTO that functions to the best of humanity. Because at the end of the day, we have seen what institutions that perpetuate inequality will lead to. And a future that, as South Africa, we are looking to is a future that allows us, at least when we come together as humanity, to work together to push development of humanity forward. And that's what we are hoping to achieve, and working with yourselves and various stakeholders, the B20 and the various other formations around this G20 presidency of South Africa, that we're able to put these things firmly on the agenda and help to articulate the framework within which they can be taken forward, even with the next chairship going forward, such that when we talk sustainable development, we are talking total human development, not just development of a few at the expense of the rest. And that, I think, in short, represent what we will be focusing on the trade and investment side. And I think just to indicate for the investment side of the discussions, we're looking at these challenges that presents to the world as an opportunity for the world to resolve with industriousness, which we know the world has, and that rules should not be made that would undermine the ability of countries such as ourselves, continents such as the African continent, to be able to provide sustainable solutions to the problems that the world seeks to solve. And we're looking for more of a partnership a model with the rest of the world that allows us to foster development for everybody. And we think that if the G20 is able to frame these things correctly, we will be able to have a lot more influence on changing the structures of the broader multilateral framework of the world beyond what we have been able to do. And that is why the work that you're doing is so important. The reflections that we are having today are so important, so that we are able to jointly take all these ideals forward. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those remarks, Malebo. And I understand that you are supposed to leave us like shortly after now. So I'll quickly invite any questions and discussion points that colleagues may have directed to you, so that you're able to address that immediately before you leave us. I'm pretty sure our task force on trade and investment would have loved to have you around when they make their remarks, but unfortunately, we cannot. But I'd like to invite the discussion points and questions, colleagues. So I'll just quickly take, there is Akman. Please unmute and proceed.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you for the invitation, and I wish all the success to T20. The international trading order, I think, enters into a new era of geopolitical fragmentation that leads to trade wars. I see that the G20 South Africa TIWG issue note at 4 main areas. And I think one of them is quite important for all the previous 3, that is WTO reform. So what specific attempts do you envisage during G20 South Africa, and what precisely do you expect from T20 in the context of WTO reform process? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think I have something on the charts, and then I'll take this and then come back to you, Malebo. So the reason trade isn't working as well as it should in terms of distribution, etc., is because it's currently seen and conducted as being in one direction, rather than being more secular or infused with the spirit of reciprocity. So as we had when bartering was the main form of trade, where we to use 2025 to infuse more reciprocity, secularity, and spirit of Ubuntu into trade, we could leave a lasting legacy to be proud of. Trade and investment should be tied at the hip, and if you want to trade with another country, you should be able to demonstrate a meaningful investment in that same country in terms of local manufacturing and co-creation to make sure that the products and services are traded fit, are fit for the purpose and best suited to the needs of the country being traded with. In short, it's applying secularity and reciprocity to trade that inspires genuine flourishing partnerships versus neo-colonial feudal dependencies. If I may please get your reactions to those two points, Ms. Malebo. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. And just to say, at least on the last one, I do agree that any relationship of trade between countries and amongst us as humanity, because sometimes when we talk countries, we tend to define ourselves as though we are so different from each other that our terms of negotiations have to be a zero-sum game. and it doesn't have to be like that. So I agree that the terms of trade and the outcomes of trade have not been just to everyone involved. I'll give you a classic example. At some point, I studied very close to the headquarters of the EU, and we had an opportunity to visit the headquarters, and there was a young person, an intern, who was taking us around. And one of the things that he said when we were talking about the implication of just changing trade rules in a way that doesn't take into account developing countries and implications for investment has had dire consequences for many countries. And we're looking at agriculture and the fact that the African continent we can't afford the type of subsidies that are provided to agriculture in the EU. And I'm not singling out the EU, I'm just giving an example. And he turned around and said, but our villages are more important. And I think it's that type of logic that the South Africa G20 is going to challenge in saying it's not just your villages, it's that humanity is more important. It's more important than approaching relationships of trade amongst us as human beings as a zero-sum game, that if somebody gains, that automatically means that someone must lose. And therefore, I have to use my power to make someone lose. And I have to create an architecture that forever keeps me powerful. Because if I do lose my power, I will potentially lose my ability to influence trade to my advantage at the total cost of somebody else. And it's those things that we're still talking about them. We're still talking about the issues of what is essentially unfair subsidies that have completely distorted the picture of trade and have made countries that have a genuine comparative advantage in those products to not be able to effectively compete because of these kind of things that have been put down. The miracle of it all, the disappointment of it all, is that these things have been discussed in the WTO since forever. And we are unable to make significant progress. So I think for all members, including the G20 members as they come here, the reflection is that we can be so loving of multilateralism, but we are unable to look at the fact that we haven't been able to make it work. What is it in the negotiations that has taken us so long to resolve what are essentially not so complex problems, and we could be able to find a genuine solution that is equitable to all of humanity? And for the WTO, I think that is the most important question. The WTO itself, having recognized that certain of its processes do not work as they should, they've now resorted to some other processes where instead of getting a global consensus on matters, you can get a number of countries just agreeing on some of the areas of negotiation because we are unable to get a global consensus. Now we are saying, even in those instances, can we ensure that not only do we have equity that allows development of developing countries, that developing countries will be given policy space to develop, such that we don't now start parallel processes that undermine the very thing we want to achieve, which is equitable trade. just based on competitive advantage, based on innovation and the impact of that innovation on humanity. We know that in most instances, there's innovation that comes from the continent, but there are rules that have been put in place to undermine that innovation from actually getting into the global north, and also amongst ourselves in the global south, being able to utilize each other's innovation. How do we start just tackling those things for real? And what frame do we need to have to be able to deal with those issues? Because if we're not framing these things correctly, we end up with this silo village mentality that a certain portion of humanity is important than others, as opposed to say what is in the best interest of all humanity that can help us all grow. And I think that there is that sweet spot even in trade. For all of us, as it is there in investment. This sweet spot discussion is actually an investment language when they're looking at a place in the investment transaction where everybody involved in that investment transaction can benefit. So I do agree that our push for multilateralism must also be equally balanced by a push to make multilateralism work, and the areas in the WTO that we will be pushing for is that the development dimensions of what the WTO must deliver must now come to the fore. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Malebo, for those remarks. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence within your very busy schedule. Thank you so much appreciated. Colleagues, I would like to move us on now to Task Force 1 on trade and investment, and we will have Dr. Axel Berger giving us the remarks. Please proceed, Dr. Berger.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, colleagues, for inviting me to present our task force. But first of all, let me provide a little bit of context before I move on and present the themes of our task force. And I'd like to also briefly introduce my fellow co-chairs who are leading the task force together with me. So let me provide a little bit of context, and I have 3 points in that respect. The first point, obviously, is that we are facing very disruptive and very polarized policy discussions and policy making. And that's especially the case, obviously, in trade policy matters. We have very intensive discussions about the usage of tariffs as policy tools, not necessarily only as trade policy tools, but also as more broadly policy tools in order to achieve policy aims in other areas than trade. So far, these tariffs are mainly discussed on a bilateral level, but what we hear from the US is also that this proposal of a reciprocal tariff regime, or whatever you might call it, which is, without going into the details, which is extremely dangerous because it's basically a violation of a key principle of the WTO, which is the MFN principle, the most favored nation principle, which basically means you have to treat all your trading partners equally. So this means we have increased tariffs. We'll likely have more and more tariffs, but we also have a very direct clash between the tariff schemes being proposed by Washington and the WTO. Obviously, this is not the only challenge. This is perhaps the most acute challenge, but it's not the only one. We also have an increased use of industrial policies as an instrument to achieve certain policy aims, in particular the green transformation. This is in itself obviously a very positive policy aim, but the tools that are being used will also create problems, because many of these tools are used on a unilateral basis. I'm just mentioning the CBAM of the European Union, but also industrial policy goals like the instrument like the usage of incentives, etc., which creates disruptions in the international system, and which is obviously also to the disadvantage of actors of economies that do not have such deep pockets to provide incentives, which then creates obviously problems when we think about the development dimension of the trading system. So we have a number of challenges, but the main point here is policymaking becomes more disruptive and polarized. My second point is, and that was obviously already mentioned by the previous speaker, by the government representative responsible for trade and investment, we are facing a weakened WTO. And obviously that's nothing new, obviously. We have a WTO which or a WTO membership, I should say, which was not able to agree on a comprehensive multilateral trading round, the Doha development round. We have a rule system in the WTO which has not been updated since many years, basically since 1995, when the WTO was founded. We have a dispute settlement system, or in particular an appeals system, which is not functioning anymore, and I could go on and on. But what I would also like to highlight is that glimpses of hope. Let's put it a positive sign. So one positive sign to start with is the reappointment of DG Ngozi last year. So the leadership of the WTO is in a very good place, in very good hands, I would say. We also have positive signals that the membership, or at least parts of the membership, is agreeing on moving forward in particular areas, like the services domestic regulation area, or there's an agreement on the table on investment facilitation for development. Members are also negotiating on e-commerce disciplines, etc., etc. So there is momentum. There's a critical mass, so to speak, of members who are willing to move forward in certain areas in order to update the rule system of the WTO. But the key point here is that it's only parts of the membership. In the case of the investment facilitation for development agreement negotiations, this is more than 2/3 of the membership. Also interesting here, these are not the usual suspects, like the big trading powers of the OECD world who are driving these negotiations, but it's mainly low and middle income countries who are driving these negotiations forward. But obviously these negotiations among coalitions of the willing and the WTO speak that's plurilateral negotiations are not favored by all members, and so there are blockages against these plurilateral negotiations. But my point would be it's really necessary in light of the disruptive phase we are entering now to really think thoroughly about a stronger use of these more flexible negotiation arrangements like plurilaterals, because achieving multilateral consensus is, to be honest, close to impossible. So we have to think about how we can align the usage of plurilateral instruments with a development focus. And we've, in the past iterations of the T20 process, we have made proposals in that respect. So third point, what does that mean for the G20? Obviously, the G20 as the platform for major economies has a key role in order to support multilateral cooperation. That's for sure. But at the same time, to be very frank, or stating the obvious, there is at least one actor at the table who is not willing to move forward with a progressive agenda like the ones supported by or suggested by South Africa, and not moving forward in a coordinated multilateral way. So in the first period of the Trump presidency between 2016 and 2020, we were able to achieve some consensus on trade. But at this time, I guess we need to have serious reflection, serious discussions, whether it's necessary to move forward with the G20 plus minus approach in order to achieve a consensus, in order to achieve progress among countries that are really willing to move forward with regard to multilateral cooperation on trade. The G20 minus one approach has already been used in the first Trump during the first Trump presidency in the climate area. So I guess we need to get we need to assess how successful that was in order to uphold the basic principles. But that's something, I guess, where the G20 needs to invest in serious thinking. But I would argue that the G20 is the key place in order to forge alliances, to move forward with regard to multilateralism. And I think the G20, the agenda of the Trade Investment Working Group, as proposed by the South African presidency, is spot on. Obviously, we've talked about WTO reform. That's really important, in particular as a ministerial conference is coming up in March 2026. So basically, in 1 year's time, but that needs to be prepared well. But also, I think the other topics on the agenda, like the green transition and industrial policies, is spot on. Also, the topic of inclusiveness is very important, and I would hope that the South African presidency can make progress on that. So, and last point on the G20, obviously, it's we will need to really seriously reflect on how to safeguard G20 consensus and G20 deliberations moving forward. So, in 2026, when the US will have the presidency, and I think in particular on trade, here we need serious discussions how the G20 process can be safeguarded as a forum in order to move forward multilaterally. So now let me very briefly, I know I only have 4.5 minutes left, very briefly introduce the task force, and I'd like to start with introducing my fellow co-chairs. Let me start with Dr. Rose Ngugi. Rose is a chair at Southern Voice, and she has also been executive director of the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis, KIPRA, and she's an expert on public policy, on finance issues, investment issues, and institutional reforms. Then Professor Mohamed Jaid is part of the group of co-chairs. Mohamed is a professor at the University of Johannesburg. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Pretoria, and his research interests can be broadly defined by economic development. And Mohamed also had various positions in the public sector so far. And last but not least, Trudy Hartzenberg is part of the co-chairs. Trudy is the executive director of the Trade Law Center in South Africa, and her interests are trade policy and regional integration. Beyond that, we have in our task force 14 co-leads. They represent different world regions, different substantive expertise, and so this is a really powerful group in order to move the task force forward. And the task force has 3 key themes: reform of the WTO, reform of the dispute settlement proceedings, obviously, but also the question of how to align trade, climate and development as key policy objectives, and how to move forward in view of serious institutional constraints at the WTO. So these will be some key issues we were discussing under the heading of WTO reform. Then the second topic of our task force is inclusive investments for sustainable industrialization. And here we will deal with investment policy framework like investment facilitation. We will discuss how MSMEs will be financed, how they can access financing better. And the third topic are global value chains for sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Here it's about reflections on how to increase resilience in global value chains and regional value chains, how to foster local value creation and diversification. Obviously, that's also an important topic, not only for low and middle income countries, but also for high income countries. And obviously, a key topic under this heading will be how to increase sustainability and inclusion in global value chains. What kind of standards do we need in order to move forward with these policy aims? So far we have, or not so far, we have received 80 policy briefs. Obviously, that's quite substantive, which shows the interest in the topic and the relevance of the topic. We are currently wrapping up our review phase, and we think there are many powerful policy briefs, and we are looking forward to the next phase when these policy briefs will be formulated and written. But let me also stress, it's not only about writing policy briefs, it's also about engaging with policymakers in substantive discussions, and in particular with the delegates of the Trade Investment Working Group. I understand that there will be 4 meetings of the Trade Investment Working Group of the G20 plus a ministerial meeting, so there will be plenty of opportunities to engage in the substantive discussions, bring in our ideas and our suggestions. And last point, I would also like to stress, in particular, as these times are so disruptive, we should also try to coordinate with other engagement groups like B20 and like to try to come up with a coherent and well-coordinated approach. Thank you, colleagues. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kubega. That was a remarkable time management. You finished exactly on 15 minutes. Thank you so much for that. Colleagues, I would like to invite the questions, discussion points for Dr. Exelberger and Task Force 1 on trade and investment. By show of hands, you can also just quickly type your question in the Q&A box, and then we will read it out. I think I can elaborate concretely with my suggestions and recommendations. I will do this. Dumiso Morena, would you clarify for us what that means? You can unmute yourself and proceed. Mr. Morena? Okay. I'm not sure, colleagues, if he's trying to speak or there's been a change of mind on raising the point, but it seems like, okay, we may not have questions for now, which then will mean I will invite, oh, there is a hand, I believe.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Yagana Fresha from the Euromediterranean Economist Association. I have a question regarding the focus of the session, whether we can also go beyond like bilateral trade agreements and also enhance the countryside, from a country perspective, the exchanges and the value chain for trade, enhancing the transparency and improving the process of making trade at the national level in order to make it more fair to all stakeholders involved and transparent. Is that also relevant? Because from my understanding from the discussion was that this mainly the focus is on bilateral agreements, how to have WTO function better and save it in some words. But can we also have this focus on at the local level and improving the process?
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks so much for that. And we have one more from the chat, Anonymous, who is asking, how can we ensure we advocate removing tariffs and tax barriers to expanding trade? And Siva Kuma, any resolution has been met in terms of BRICS trading currency? I think that's a question, but it has been put as a statement. So has there been any resolution from BRICS member states, I guess, on the trading currency? So I think you can give us a reaction on those three, Dr. Berger. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. On BRICS and trading currencies, I must admit I'm not the expert on that, but I understand that we have a task force that is dealing with financing issues. So perhaps this question could be then brought up again when this task force presents their approach. Yeah, on the other questions, I'm not quite sure whether I got really the sense of the question, but let me try. Removing tariffs, yes, obviously. I mean, the economic consensus is very clear on that it makes sense to lower tariffs, but actually we are moving in the opposite direction. That's nothing new, I must say. That this isn't something started under Trump, but this is a long-term process, especially since the global financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. So basically, since the inception of the G20, the G20 put forward the goal of removing barriers to trade and scaling back tariffs and non-tariff barriers. But so far, we have seen the opposite direction. So more and more tariff and non-tariff barriers. So the question obviously is how to, or the more immediate question is how to, stabilize the system in a way that we have, first of all, transparency on the tariffs and making sure that the tariffs that are being imposed are within the boundaries of the multilateral trading system. As I alluded to in my talk, I see serious challenges ahead of us, in particular with the reciprocal tariff scheme proposed by the US. This could really damage the WTO and the WTO system. So on removing tariffs, unfortunately, I don't see a positive scenario or light at the end of the tunnel. On bilaterals, as I said, I was not quite sure whether I got the sense of the question, but obviously doing bilateral deals. That seems to be at least the preference of Washington. And I would hope that we can avoid this situation, because that will create a lot of frictions in the world trading system if every country is now doing bilateral deals and trying to get the best out of the negotiations with the US, because that will create something that economists like to call a spaghetti bowl of different rules that will create a very complex trading environment for companies. And predictability and transparency and efficiency obviously is the key thing for companies to trade and to do investment. So that's really not a good direction. And there was also a question on aid for trade, if I understand, in the chat box, on the question and answers box. This is still important topic. I've discussed, for example, I've discussed the topic of investment facilitation for development. There's an agreement at the WTO which is ready to be signed, which has a strong development dimension, I must say. And here also the idea is to really enhance the domestic infrastructure in developing countries in order to actually conduct the reform and implement the reforms that are necessary in order to attract more investment. So enhancing the domestic institutional frameworks via aid for trade or whatever you will call it is a key topic which needs more emphasis. We do not only need the multilateral rules, we also need domestic structures that are really in a good place in order to benefit from these multilateral agreements.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Berger. That was the second last item for our program today. Thank you so much for all the speakers who've made their interventions. I hope that some clarity was provided on the process that the T20 South Africa will take moving forward, and of course that interface that we had promised that to be clarified between our T20 process and then the South African G20 presidency. And then of course the clarification of our theme on consolidating and sustaining the work that has come before our presidency this year. So at this point, I would like to invite Professor Spamandla Zondi, who will then be giving us the closing remarks on behalf of the South African T20 Secretariat. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Duma, for steering this well. Thank you very much to the speakers for enlightening us and for helping us get started on a sound noting. A special thanks to the team that put this together and made sure everything works together. Really great thanks to the chairs and co-chairs of the task forces that are hard at work, getting work together. I know that they'll be giving feedback now to the authors of abstracts, and then that will roll us over to the policy brief period. We're looking forward to great ideas, especially ideas around how do we resolve the contradictions, make the connections a little stronger, enable and catalyze implementation of existing points of consensus already, but better monitoring, better accountability mechanisms, better measurement of what is being done, especially happening at a time when it coincides with the 20-year review of the G20. We truly believe that the T20 can offer a lot to the G20 process and to the world generally in relation to how do we do better what we want to do anyway, on top of suggesting things that we need to start to agree on. It is to look at what we agree already, but it is not translating to impact, not translating to outcomes. It's not being implemented, and look at how do you get that going, including how do you do the presidents of the G20 better than in the past, and how do you use this as an opportunity to do all that we do. But we are mindful of the fact that it happened in the backdrop of difficult geopolitics, and I can't think of any recent G20 that did not happen under the cloud of difficult geopolitics. I'm thinking about Indonesia, where they had to really wrestle with two very big issues at the same time. It was the COVID geopolitics and COVID nationalism on one side, and then it was the beginning of the war in Ukraine. And then it was divisions over the war in Ukraine, in India, and then in Brazil, of course, that issue continues on top of other issues that came up. So geopolitics will always be difficult. They'll always throw in new dynamics. And right now we have dynamics around the division between the US and Europe a lot more, and then the US posture changing in the world. It's a dynamic we have to think about, but the agenda has to be pursued. The agenda for change, agenda for outcomes that are good for people of the world, the agenda for development outcomes and progress needs to happen. Second, it's a long and murky world of international diplomacy with all manner of levers all moving at the same time. It's a very complex thing in all of that. Yet, it is the best of what we have, and we have to work through it in order to achieve the better world that we are looking for, the better world especially for the poor, the better world for the underdeveloped, better world for those who are on the sideline. Thirdly, it's dealing with complex issues, as it's shown here, a lot of complex issues that we have to deal with, many of them interconnected, many of them have their own specificities, and we have to be able to deal with all of that at the same time in a very short space of time with a lot of moving parts that we have to deal with. It's a complicated process. Even for us in the T20, it is definitely a complicated process and a difficult terrain, but it is time. It is time for us to make a contribution that we can make together to get the world moving in the direction of the world that the people of the world want or deserve. And lastly, it's going to be very important that all is done by boosting and harnessing the spirit of solidarity, existing solidarity network, and the commitment to a shared future and shared aspirations, and finding ways to edge us closer towards equality, and to do it, but on the basis that it must be sustainable move in that direction. And I think we are well set to do that, and there are many activities to give us an opportunity this year to do that. And we count on all of you to be part of this. Please like our social media pages, check out our website, T20 South Africa website. It's very easy to check it on the Google and sign up so that you get notifications about upcoming events and upcoming situations. And we look forward to your contribution in side events, and we're looking forward to the groups of research centers contributing and putting together side events that we can look into and look out for a call for applications for side events to come very, very soon. Hope to see many of you at the T20 Africa High-Level Dialogue on the 29th and the 30th of April, and then on subsequent events, especially the midterm conference and the T20 Summit. At this point, I just want to thank you, all of you, on behalf of the three institutes, the South African Institute for International Affairs, the Institute for Global Dialogue, and ourselves at the University of Pretoria, of Johannesburg, sorry. And we really want to wish you all the best and have a lovely day further. Seeing you tomorrow, which is 1 o'clock South African Standard Time, and then it's different times everywhere else. See you tomorrow, and all the best. If you don't mind, those who are on the panel, they can turn on their videos so that we can take a group picture even at this point. Okay, are you able to turn on your videos, guys? Sylvester, Yekane, Nondumiso, Zama, Malebu, Sisi, yeah, thank you. Such an honor to see you, Sisi. Thank you so much for being here. Thonpo, Nondumiso, Said Aka, will wait for you. Please don't make us wait too long. Please. Dumiso, Yekane, Pilani, if you don't mind, please. Don't keep us waiting too long. Dumiso Murena, and I see Yekane, Foresta.
Yes, I was not in the panel, so.
Okay, Syed Blackman.
Okay.
Sylvester. Okay, no, that's fine. I guess that's it. A smile, colleague, smile like you are not in the T20 and it's stressful circumstances. Gonna make it solidarity, equality, and sustainability this year. We will make it. Thank you. Anyone took a picture? Oh, it's me who must take a picture. Oh, sorry. Let me take a picture. I thought we need someone with a more 21st century phone, not those of us who have a 20th century phone.
I think we can take a screen
I've done it.
whatever it's called.
Thank you so much, guys. All the very best.
Cheers,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
See you
Thank you
tomorrow.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.